The steam rising from my coffee cup usually brought a small measure of comfort, a familiar ritual to start the day. But this morning, watching Caroline across the kitchen island, the warmth felt distant, almost mocking. She hummed softly, a tune I didn't recognize, as she meticulously arranged slices of fruit on her yogurt parfait. The sunlight caught the gold band on her left hand, the same one I'd placed there 32 years ago, and a cold fist clenched somewhere deep in my chest. She looked up, catching my eye, and offered a practiced smile. "Morning, sleepyhead. Rough night?" Her voice, usually a melody that settled my nerves, now scraped against them like sandpaper. I forced a nod, unable to trust my own voice. "Something like that. Just thinking." "About," she prompted, tilting her head in that way she did when she feigned genuine curiosity. The gesture, once endearing, now felt like a performance, another layer in the elaborate play she'd been staging. How could I tell her what I was thinking? How could I say that every glance, every casual touch, every shared memory now felt tainted, viewed through the sickening filter of what I knew? How could I explain that the man she thought was still asleep beside her last night had been wide awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the fragmented images, the undeniable evidence that had fallen into my lap like a cruel joke just days before? It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a tearful confession that had broken the illusion. It was quieter, more insidious, an accidental glimpse of a message on her tablet left open on the bedside table, a message not meant for my eyes, filled with words and plans that shattered the foundation of our shared life. The sender's name was unfamiliar, but the intimacy, the shared future hinted at within the lines, was unmistakable. It painted a picture of a life Caroline was living parallel to ours, a secret world where I was merely an obstacle, a familiar piece of furniture she hadn't yet figured out how to discard. Since that moment, I'd been living in a fog of disbelief and a quiet, simmering rage that felt alien in my own body. I looked at her, searching her face for any flicker of guilt, any sign of the woman I thought I knew. But there was only the smooth, placid surface she presented to the world, the practiced ease of someone convinced their secrets were safe. "Thinking about the garden," I finally managed, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "Needs weeding." She nodded, accepting the explanation without question, turning back to her breakfast. "Yes, it does. Maybe we can tackle it this weekend." "We." The word hung in the air, heavy and distorted. There was no we anymore, not in the way she meant. There was her, living her double life, and there was me, the unwilling audience member who'd stumbled backstage and seen the cheap props and tangled wires holding the production together. The parfait looked perfect, a colorful swirl in a crystal glass. It struck me how much effort she put into appearances, into maintaining the facade of normalcy. Our home, our routines, our interactions, all carefully curated. But beneath the polished surface, rot had set in, silently eating away at the structure until only a hollow shell remained. I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter. Everything felt bitter now. The silence stretched between us, no longer comfortable, but thick with unspoken truths and the vast, echoing space where trust used to reside. I watched her eat, each spoonful a small, deliberate movement, and wondered how long she thought she could keep juggling these two lives. Did she feel the strain? Or had the deception become so routine that it felt like breathing? The pain wasn't just anger, it was a profound, aching grief. Grief for the man I was before I knew, the trusting husband who believed in the sanctity of our vows, the partner who thought forever actually meant something. Grief for the 32 years I now saw through a fractured lens, questioning every anniversary dinner, every shared laugh, every whispered, "I love you." Were they all part of the act? Had I been a fool all along? My hands trembled slightly as I set the mug down. I needed to get out, away from the suffocating normalcy of the kitchen, away from her easy smile that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "Think I'll get some air," I mumbled, pushing my chair back. Caroline looked up again, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Perhaps surprise, perhaps irritation at the disruption of her morning routine. "Everything okay, Tom?" "Fine," I said, the word clipped. "Just need to clear my head." The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I imagined her face, the initial surprise, the denial, perhaps followed by anger or justifications. Could I endure that? Could I listen to her try and explain away the wreckage? The back door slid open, and my heart leaped into my throat. Caroline stood there, silhouetted against the kitchen light, holding out my jacket. "It's getting a bit chilly," she said, her voice soft, carrying easily in the quiet air. "Didn't want you to catch cold." The gesture, so mundane, so typically caring, felt utterly incongruous. A wife concerned about her husband catching a chill while simultaneously planning a life with another man. The dissonance was jarring, almost surreal. I couldn't reconcile the two Carolines, the one standing there, offering my jacket with gentle concern, and the one who existed in those secret messages. I didn't move. I just stared at her, searching for a crack in the performance. She took a step towards me, her expression shifting slightly, a faint line appearing between her brows. "Tom? Are you sure you're all right? You seem distant." Distant. Yes, that was one word for it. Standing on the other side of an unbridgeable chasm felt more accurate. I finally stood up, avoiding her eyes, and took the jacket she held out. "Thanks," I mumbled, slipping it on. The familiar weight felt strange, alien. Everything felt alien now. "Just thinking," I repeated, turning away from her, back towards the overgrown garden. Just thinking about what needs to be pulled out by the roots. Caroline lingered by the patio door for a moment, her presence a weight I could feel even with my back turned. I heard the faint rustle of her robe as she shifted her stance. "Well," she said, her voice attempting lightness, "if you decide you want help with those roots, let me know. Many hands make light work, you know." The old saying, one her grandmother used to repeat, struck a dissonant chord. Many hands. Whose hands? Mine, hers, and his? The image was grotesque. I didn't reply, focusing instead on a particularly stubborn patch of dandelions mocking me from the edge of the rose bushes. Their cheerful yellow heads seemed obscene under the circumstances. I knelt down, the damp earth cool against my knees, and began pulling. The roots ran deeper than expected, clinging tenaciously to the soil. It required effort, a firm grip and a steady pull to dislodge them without breaking them off, leaving the core intact to sprout again. The physical exertion was a small release, a channel for the turmoil churning inside me. Each weed yanked free felt like a tiny, unsatisfying victory against the chaos. I heard the patio door slide shut. Relief washed over me, swift and unexpected. Being alone with my thoughts was painful, but being near her, pretending normalcy, was torture. The silence resettled, broken only by the chirping of birds and the faint rasp of my own breathing. As I worked my way along the flower bed, my mind drifted back again, sifting through memories, searching for clues I'd overlooked. That trip she took last fall, a wellness retreat, with friends I'd never heard mentioned before or since. She'd come back glowing, calmer than I'd seen her in months. Had that glow been the flush of renewed connection with me, as I'd naively assumed, or the residue of time spent with him? The sudden increase in late nights at the office coincided with her promotion, a plausible explanation I hadn't questioned. Was her ambition the only thing driving her, or was it a convenient cover? The questions were corrosive, eating away at the foundations of our shared past. Every memory was now suspect, every explanation potentially a lie. It felt like discovering the blueprints of our life had been subtly altered years ago, and I was only just noticing the discrepancies, the rooms that didn't lead where I thought they did, the hidden corridors built for secret passages. I unearthed a thick, gnarled root, like a deformed hand clutching the earth. It took considerable effort to wrench it free. As I tossed, the thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I imagined her face, the initial surprise, the denial, perhaps followed by anger or justifications. Could I endure that? Could I listen to her try and explain away the wreckage? The back door slid open, and my heart leaped into my throat. Caroline stood there, silhouetted against the kitchen light, holding out my jacket. "It's getting a bit chilly," she said, her voice soft, carrying easily in the quiet air. "Didn't want you to catch cold." The gesture, so mundane, so typically caring, felt utterly incongruous. A wife concerned about her husband catching a chill while simultaneously planning a life with another man. The dissonance was jarring, almost surreal. I couldn't reconcile the two Carolines, the one standing there offering my jacket with gentle concern, and the one who existed in those secret messages. I didn't move. I just stared at her, searching for a crack in the performance. She took a step towards me, her expression shifting slightly, a faint line appearing between her brows. "Tom? Are you sure you're all right? You seem distant." Distant. Yes, that was one word for it. Standing on the other side of an unbridgeable chasm felt more accurate. I finally stood up, avoiding her eyes, and took the jacket she held out. "Thanks," I mumbled, slipping it on. The familiar weight felt strange, alien. Everything felt alien now. "Just thinking," I repeated, turning away from her, back toward the overgrown garden. Just thinking about what needs to be pulled out by the roots. Caroline lingered by the patio door for a moment, her presence a weight I could feel even with my back turned. I heard the faint rustle of her robe as she shifted her stance. "Well," she said, her voice attempting lightness, "if you decide you want help with those roots, let me know. Many hands make light work, you know." The old saying, one her grandmother used to repeat, struck a dissonant chord. Many hands. Whose hands? Mine, hers, and his? The image was grotesque. I didn't reply, focusing instead on a particularly stubborn patch of dandelions mocking me from the edge of the rose bushes. Their cheerful yellow heads seemed obscene under the circumstances. I knelt down, the damp earth cool against my knees, and began pulling. The roots ran deeper than expected, clinging tenaciously to the soil. It required effort, a firm grip and a steady pull to dislodge them without breaking them off, leaving the core intact to sprout again. The physical exertion was a small release, a channel for the turmoil churning inside me. Each weed yanked free felt like a tiny, unsatisfying victory against the chaos. I heard the patio door slide shut. Relief washed over me, swift and unexpected. Being alone with my thoughts was painful, but being near her, pretending normalcy, was torture. The silence resettled, broken only by the chirping of birds and the faint rasp of my own breathing. As I worked my way along the flower bed, my mind drifted back again, sifting through memories, searching for clues I'd overlooked. That trip she took last fall, a wellness retreat, with friends I'd never heard mentioned before or since. She'd come back glowing, calmer than I'd seen her in months. Had that glow been the flush of renewed connection with me, as I'd naively assumed, or the residue of time spent with him? The sudden increase in late nights at the office coincided with her promotion, a plausible explanation I hadn't questioned. Was her ambition the only thing driving her, or was it a convenient cover? The questions were corrosive, eating away at the foundations of our shared past. Every memory was now suspect, every explanation potentially a lie. It felt like discovering the blueprints of our life had been subtly altered years ago, and I was only just noticing the discrepancies, the rooms that didn't lead where I thought they did, the hidden corridors built for secret passages. I unearthed a thick, gnarled root, like a deformed hand clutching the earth. It took considerable effort to wrench it free. As I tossed, I sat back on my heels, surveying the small section I'd cleared. It looked better, tidier, but the rest of the garden stretched out, dauntingly overgrown in places. It would take hours, days maybe, to truly reclaim it, just like reclaiming my life. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, burning off the last of the morning dew. I could smell the damp earth, the faint perfume of the late-blooming jasmine climbing the trellis nearby. It was a scent I associated with countless peaceful mornings, lazy weekend afternoons spent reading on the patio while Caroline potted plants. Now, even the jasmine seemed tainted, its sweetness cloying. I knew I couldn't stay out here forever, pulling weeds and avoiding the inevitable. Sooner or later, I would have to go back inside. I would have to face her. The confrontation loomed like a gathering storm cloud, heavy and menacing. I didn't know what words I would use, what tone I would take. Would I be cold and surgical, laying out the facts? Or would the dam of grief and anger finally break, unleashing a torrent I couldn't control? Part of me wanted to hurt her, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain radiating through me. Another part just wanted answers, the raw, unvarnished truth, however ugly it might be. And beneath it all, a weary, broken part just wanted it to be over, wanted to fast forward through the messy, agonizing unraveling to whatever came next. But there was no fast-forward button. There was only the slow, excruciating present. I picked up another dandelion, its stem fragile between my fingers. I looked towards the house. The kitchen window was empty now. Where had she gone? What was she doing? Was she texting him, arranging their next meeting, oblivious to the fact that her carefully constructed world was about to implode? The uncertainty was maddening. With a sigh that felt dredged up from the depths of my soul, I got to my feet, brushing the damp earth from my knees. The pile of weeds seemed insignificant compared to the task ahead. Facing the garden was one thing. Facing Caroline, armed with the terrible knowledge I now possessed, was another entirely. My steps felt heavy as I walked back towards the patio door, the flimsy shield of denial dissolving with each reluctant footfall. The time for pulling weeds was over. The sliding door hissed softly as I pulled it open. stepping back into the deceptive calm of the house. The scent of coffee lingered, mixed now with the faint aroma of the toast Caroline must have made after I went outside. Sunlight streamed through the living room window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, oblivious to the human drama unfolding beneath them. It all looked painfully normal, a stage set for a play whose script had suddenly, violently changed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Each step I took towards a living room felt amplified, echoing in the quiet house. I braced myself, expecting to find her curled up on the sofa, reading the newspaper or scrolling through her tablet, perhaps deleting the very evidence that had condemned her. Instead, the living room was empty. A throw blanket was folded neatly over the arm of her favorite chair. A novel lay face down on the side table, bookmark peeking out. The tidiness felt orchestrated, another layer of her careful facade. I glanced towards the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Was she in there? On the phone? Whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear? A low murmur of voices reached me, coming from the direction of the study. My study. The room where I kept my architectural drawings, my books. The quiet sanctuary where I often worked late into the night. A cold spike of anger shot through me. Was she in there? With him? The thought was absurd. He wouldn't be here, not physically, but the violation felt real nonetheless. I moved towards the study door, which was slightly ajar. Her voice was clearer now, low and confidential, punctuated by pauses. She wasn't speaking loudly, but there was an intensity, an earnestness in her tone that made my blood run cold. I couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of her speech, the intimacy it conveyed. My hand hovered over the doorknob. Should I push it open, announce my presence, catch her in the act of her betrayal, even if only verbal? Or should I retreat, gather myself, choose a more deliberate moment for the confrontation? Before I could decide, her voice rose slightly, laced with something that sounded like frustration. No, you don't understand. It's not that simple right now. Things are complicated here. A pause. Yes, I know what we discussed, but timing is everything. You have to be patient. Patient? The word struck me like a physical blow. Patient for what? For her to finally discard me? For the right moment to execute their plan? The calculated coldness of it stole my breath. This wasn't a fleeting mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a plotted course, a strategy being implemented while I unknowingly went about my life. My resolve hardened. The last vestiges of doubt, the faint whispers of hope for a misunderstanding, evaporated. There was no misunderstanding this. I pushed the door open. Caroline stood by the window, her back mostly to me, phone pressed to her ear. She was staring out at the garden, the same garden I had just been tending. She didn't hear me enter over the sound of her own voice. "Look, I have to go," she was saying, her tone softening again, becoming almost conspiratorial. "He's wandering around acting strange this morning. I don't want him to suspect anything." Suspect anything? The confirmation, so casually delivered, landed with devastating finality. She turned then, sensing my presence, and the phone slipped slightly in her hand. Her eyes widened, first in surprise, then in a dawning, horrified realization as she saw my face, saw the knowledge reflected there. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin pale and translucent, like fragile porcelain. She snapped the phone shut, jamming it into the pocket of her robe as if trying to hide the physical evidence of her conversation. Her composure, usually so unshakable, fractured completely. "Tom," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper, I didn't hear you come in." I didn't say anything. I just stood there in the doorway, letting the silence stretch, letting her see the full weight of what I knew, what I had heard. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the wreckage of 32 years lying between us. Her carefully constructed world had just imploded, and the architect of its destruction was standing right in front of her. "Who were you talking to, Caroline?" I finally asked, my voice dangerously quiet, devoid of the anger I felt simmering just beneath the surface. It was colder, flatter, the voice of a man whose heart had been irrevocably broken. Caroline's hand flew instinctively to her throat, fingers fluttering against her pulse point. Her eyes darted around the room, anywhere but at my face, as if seeking an escape route that didn't exist. It was just Sarah," she stammered, the name sounding flimsy even to my own ears. "From the book club. We were just confirming plans for—" "Stop," I interrupted. The word wasn't loud, but it cut through her desperate fabrication like a shard of glass. "Stop lying, Caroline. I heard you." Her breath hitched. The color that had drained from her face now returned in uneven red splotches across her neck and cheeks. "Heard what?" she whispered, though the question lacked any real conviction. She knew what I'd heard. "I heard you say I was acting strange," I recited, the words tasting like poison. "I heard you say you didn't want me to suspect anything. I heard you tell whoever that was to be patient." My voice remained level, almost detached, but inside, a fault line was cracking wider with every word I spoke. Patient for what? Caroline whirled, crumbling around her. "Tom, please," she whispered, taking a hesitant step towards me. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" My voice was still low, but an edge of steel crept into it. "Explain the complicated situation? Explain why someone needs to be patient? Explain why you didn't want me to suspect anything while you were talking to Susan?" The name dripped with sarcasm I didn't bother to conceal. She flinched, recoiling as if struck. The tears spilled over, tracing paths down her pale cheeks. "It's not what you think," she pleaded, resorting to the oldest, most predictable cliché in the book. A humorless laugh escaped me, dry and brittle. "Isn't it? After 32 years, Caroline, I think I know exactly what this is. The only thing I don't know is his name. And how long? How long has this charade been going on? For the right moment to tell me, or just the right moment to leave?" She flinched as if struck. Her carefully maintained facade crumbled completely, leaving behind raw, undisguised panic. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over and tracing paths through the faint remnants of her makeup. "Tom, please," she choked out, taking a shaky step towards me, her hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. It's not what you think." "Isn't it?" I countered, bitterness finally seeping into my tone. "Then what is it? What is the explanation for the messages I saw, for the phone call I just overheard? Enlighten me, Caroline, because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like betrayal. It looks like you've been living a lie, building a separate life while pretending everything here was fine." The last shred of defiance left her. Her shoulders slumped, and the tears flowed freely now. She wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together. I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she sobbed, the words muffled. "Like this?" The absurdity of her statement fueled a cold anger that began to eclipse the grief. "You mean you didn't mean for me to find out at all? You meant to continue deceiving me, sneaking around, making plans behind my back until it suited you to finally end it." I took a step closer, invading the space she usually guarded so carefully. 32 years, Caroline? Did any of it mean anything to you? Or was I just convenient? A placeholder until something better came along? She shook her head vehemently, burying her face in her hands. No, it wasn't like that. It meant everything, but things change. People change. People change, I echoed flatly. But each question landed like a blow. I watched her absorb them, watched the desperate calculations flicker behind her eyes as she tried to formulate an answer, any answer that might mitigate the damage. But the damage was done. The foundations were shattered beyond repair. She shook her head, sobbing quietly now. "Tom, it just happened. I didn't plan it." "You didn't plan it?" I echoed, the absurdity of the statement fueling a fresh wave of cold anger. "You didn't plan the late nights, the secret trips, the lies? You didn't plan telling him to be patient while you figured out how to deal with your inconvenient husband? It sounds remarkably well planned to me." My gaze swept around the study, my space, filled with the tools of my trade, the symbols of the life I thought I had built, a life grounded in structure, integrity, and truth. And she had stood here, in my sanctuary, weaving her web of deceit. The violation felt profound. "Who is he?" I repeated, the question hanging heavy between us. I needed a name. I needed to put a face, a label, on the phantom who had haunted the edges of my awareness, the man who had trespassed into my marriage. Caroline wouldn't meet my eyes. She stared down at her hands, twisting the fabric of her robe. Her silence was an answer in itself, a confirmation of guilt so profound she couldn't even voice the name of her accomplice. "Look at me, Caroline," I demanded, my voice finally rising, cracking with the strain of suppressed emotion. Slowly, reluctantly, she lifted her head. Her face was blotchy, tear-streaked, stripped bare of its usual poise. She looked older, frailer, lost. A part of me, conditioned by decades of love and partnership, felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the searing reality of her betrayal. "Tell me," I insisted. Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, seemingly unable to form the word. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, and in that silence, they don't have to lie. They don't have to destroy the person they supposedly built a life with. I looked around the study, my eyes landing on a framed photo on the desk. The two of us, younger, smiling, understood. The specific name almost didn't matter anymore. The act itself, the prolonged deception, the casual disregard for everything we had built, that was the core of the wound. He was merely a symptom of a deeper decay. "Get out," I said, the words falling like stones into the chasm between us. She stared, taken on our 25th anniversary. The image felt like a relic from another lifetime, belonging to two people who no longer existed. "Who is he, Carolyn?" I asked again, the question hanging heavy in the air between us. This time, it wasn't just a demand for information. It was the tolling of a bell signaling the end. There was no going back from this moment, no patching up the chasm that had opened between us. There at me, confusion warring with fear in her eyes. "What?" "Get out of my study," I clarified, my voice regaining its cold composure. "And then get out of my house." The words hung in the air, stark and absolute. Get out of my house. Caroline stared at me, her tear-streaked face a mask of disbelief. "Tom, you don't mean that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Where would I go?" "I don't care," I replied, and the coldness of my own voice surprised even me. The reservoir of empathy I'd always held for her, even in anger, had run dry. All that remained was a desolate landscape of betrayal and hurt. "You made plans. You told him to be patient. I assume your complicated situation just became much simpler. Go to him, or go back to Susan. Just go." She flinched again, recoiling from the harsh finality in my tone. For a moment, she seemed poised to argue, to plead again, perhaps to unleash her own justifications or anger. But something in my eyes must have stopped her. The knowledge that there was nothing left to salvage, no bridge left unburned, finally seemed to register. Her shoulders sagged further, the fight draining out of her completely. Without another word, she turned slowly and walked out of the study doorway. I watched her go, noticing the slight tremor in her hands, the way she kept her gaze fixed on the floor ahead, unable to look at me, unable perhaps to look at the life she was leaving behind. I didn't follow her immediately. I stood rooted to the spot in the doorway of my study, listening to her footsteps retreat down the hallway. The house felt unnaturally quiet, amplifying the soft sounds of her departure, the click of the bedroom door opening, the muffled rustle of drawers being pulled out, the faint snap of a suitcase latch. Each sound felt like a final punctuation mark at the end of a very long, now irrevocably finished chapter. A strange numbness began to creep over me, overlaying the sharp edges of pain. It was the body's defense mechanism, I supposed, shutting down before the overload became unbearable. 32 years were ending not with a dramatic explosion, but with the quiet, almost furtive sounds of someone packing a bag. After a few minutes that stretched into an eternity, I walked slowly out into the hallway. She emerged from the bedroom carrying a small overnight bag, the kind she used for those weekend retreats. Her face was pale but composed now, her tears seemingly spent, replaced by a sort of brittle resignation. She avoided my gaze, moving purposefully towards the front door. She didn't take the framed photos from the hall table, didn't pause by the coat rack where our jackets had hung side by side for decades. She moved like a guest, leaving after an uncomfortable stay, eager to be gone. At the front door, she hesitated, her hand resting on the knob. She turned back, finally meeting my eyes across the length of the entryway. Her expression was unreadable, a complex mix of regret, perhaps defiance, perhaps simply exhaustion. She started, then stopped. What was there left to say? Apologies felt inadequate, explanations pointless. We stood there for a long moment, two strangers occupying the shell of a shared life, the silence thick with unspoken history and irreparable damage. Then, with a quiet click, she opened the door, stepped outside, and pulled it shut behind her. The sound echoed through the house. Silence descended, absolute and profound. I stood alone in the entryway, the imprint of her final glance still lingering in the air. The house felt vast, empty, the familiar space suddenly alien and cold. The scent of her perfume seemed to cling to the air, a ghostly reminder. I walked to the living room window and watched as she got into her car, the one we had picked out together just last year. She didn't look back at the house. She simply started the engine and drove away, disappearing down the quiet suburban street, leaving behind the wreckage of our life and the deafening silence of her absence. The roots had been pulled. Now I was left standing alone in the overturned earth.